Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures podcast here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett. We have a very special show lined up for you today, and it's one that I've been looking forward to for some time now. Dr. John Delony is with us on the pod, best-selling author, mental health expert, and host of the Dr. John Delony Show on the Ramsey Network. You can also hear him on the Ramsey Show talking about money and relationships. John, it's such an honor to have the chance to speak with you. How are you doing today, man?
Dude, I'm doing fantastic. The snow's melted and the deer season ended this weekend. So I got my first weekend to actually sleep in since about August. So it's good, man. It's good.
That's great. Well, I'll be up front for you and our listeners and viewers here. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours and everyone at the Ramsey team. Dave's books and baby steps have been life-changing for my wife and I and our family. And I'd love it if you could share with the listeners how you became a part of the Ramsey team and how you got to where you're at in your journey in life.
Oh man. I mean, it's a complete and utter sideways accident. I spent about 20 years working in education, and most of that time was spent at the university level as a dean of students and a professor, just walking alongside students. And as a dean of students, you deal with, mostly behind closed door stuff when the wheels fall off in people's life, whether they're dealing with mental health challenges or addiction challenges, or they got caught cheating and we got to deal with what we do now, or they're struggling with any number of challenges. And then what happened over the years is I would sit with families and try to figure out what we're going to do with this kid. And then I'd have a mom or dad reach out and call me and say, hey, I really liked how you handled that. Can I ask you a question about this? And so, and then towards the end of my career in education, and when I was in West Texas, I also worked evenings and nights and really 24/7 with the police department, in addition to my job as a dean of students, helping with crisis response. I was a part of a victim services team that we would go out and basically do death notifications, or we'd show up in the middle of the night in the worst of the worst of the worst situations. So the majority of my career has been spent sitting with hurting people, or sitting with confused, struggling people, trying to figure out what's the next right move. And so that was just what I did. And I took a job here in Nashville, Tennessee. I lived in Texas my entire life and worked at several universities there. And then I came out to Nashville to work at a university, and I was speaking to a group of parents and students, about 1,000 parents and students. And there's a whole backstory, but I was a bit off the rails and didn't do my normal prepared stuff. I kind of just let it rip. And Dave Ramsey's executive vice president was in the audience dropping her daughter off. And the way she tells it is she pointed up and said, I'm going to hire that guy. And so Dave and I met and we hung out, and I helped them with a few things behind closed doors. And I didn't realize I was in a job interview. And then about 9 months in, they said, hey, we'd love it if you consider joining our team. And we worked together for another 9 months or so, and then we figured it out. And then, as my son says, now I'm just a YouTuber. That's what I do now. So I walked away from higher ed, and it's been an extraordinary adventure ever since.
What's it like working every day with Dave, Rachel, Ken, George, and Jay? Just that whole group you have, that core.
I mean, it's a wacky mix, man, because everybody has their unique story and everybody's got their unique expertise, and everybody, it's a bunch of super, super, super smart people and super, super quick-witted people who are good with their words. And so it makes for some adventurous, hilarious interactions all the time. But Dave's become one of my closest buddies. We travel a lot together, and behind closed doors, he's one of the most generous, compassionate people you're ever going to meet. Like, he's obsessed with helping single moms and helping truck drivers and helping blue collar folks, helping everybody, but just helping people have peace in their households. And so it's been cool to get to learn. It's like, I always tell people I'm like a guitar player who's getting to learn how to play guitar standing on stage next to Eddie Van Halen, right? So I get to learn. I don't know anything about radio. I don't know anything about podcast. I don't know anything about any of this stuff. And but I get to sit by that guy and learn. So it's been pretty remarkable.
One quick follow-up before we get into the hunting side of things. So been listening to Dave for over a decade here for myself. What's your favorite Daveism? For me, I think it's probably either got a PhD in DUMB or what's the other one? Oh, when he says folks have more degrees than a thermometer. So that one always gets me.
Yeah, but I mean, so my favorite thing about Dave, I don't know if I have a favorite Dave-ism because I sit by him all the time. And so it feels like they never end. I don't know where they come from, but they come from his soul. Like he's just got, it's like a billion of them. My favorite thing about Dave is this. He's the reverse of almost anybody I've ever been around. And what I mean by that is he sat me down one time and I asked him a question, and he had a big whiteboard and he was walking through how bond rates long-term are impacted by interest rates in the short term and how they're all connected, but not really connected to mortgage rate. And I remember sitting there, and again, I've grown up, my entire professional career has been spent around people with PhDs and JDs and medical degrees. And as he was talking, I remember laughing because I didn't know half of what he was talking about. He was infinitely smarter than I could be. And I remember thinking, oh, he's like Good Will Hunting. He's a savant. And on the air, most people are kind of have a good grasp of their thing, and they come across trying to sound smarter than they are. He is a savant guy who works really hard to make sure people who have never taken an economics class or a finance class in their life can go home and have some peace in their house. And so that's my favorite thing about him is that, man, we can get some highfalutin conversations behind closed doors. But he's the one that has taught me over and over, dude, the world's got Andrew Huberman. You're not that smart, Delony. You're never going to be Andrew Huberman. Can you take the psychology stuff and 20 years of experience and 2 PhDs? Can you take all that and communicate it in a way to a person who will only read 1 book a year, how that guy or that mom could have a better life? And so that's been such an amazing journey. So that's my favorite thing there. And I do love it when Dave bags on. He's like, you got more degrees than a thermometer. And next to me is Dr. John Delony with 2 PhDs. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So it's fun to make fun of, and also it's a cool selling point too. So that's some of my favorite.
Oh man, well, thanks for all that you guys do. Seriously, and
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, and we really appreciate the time here. You joining us on our small show here. People may be curious, John, why you're joining us on a hunting show, and I'd been noticing off and on throughout the last couple of years that on Instagram that you'll share some posts, whether you're in a tree stand or shooting your bow, or even I think there was one time you were holding a big largemouth bass. You're out on a boat on a lake, and I thought to myself, we have got to hear the story of John Delony's passion for hunting, fishing, archery. I mean, you name it. So let's just start there, John. How did you get connected to the outdoors? Where's that deep passion come from?
I think number one, my dad was a policeman growing up, and he, I think he made $19,000 or something when I was a kid. They just didn't pay policemen anything. They still don't, but back then, especially, it was really low. So he always had a second job, whether he was cleaning up the church as a part-time janitor on the weekends or mowing lawns. Well, he had a colleague that also had a part-time job as a taxidermist. And so my dad as a kid would take me out, and this is going to sound crazy to your listeners, but we'd go snake hunting. And we would we'd kill poisonous snakes, and he would take them to his colleague who would turn them into hats and belts and things like that. So and my dad would take me fishing all the time. He wasn't a hunter, but he would take me fishing. So some of my earliest memories are out there with my old man, and it's kind of just in my nervous system. Well, then I got in high school, I was catching snakes with a buddy, and that was kind of a part-time job. We would give them sell them to a local pet store. And, then that led to just, I like being outdoors and adventures and just being kind of a lunatic. And then I married a woman whose father is on the pro bass circuit. And so I like to fish, like just throwing a catfish line out. My father-in-law is an amazing fisherman. It's kind of staggering. But he was also an avid deer hunter. And so he poked and prodded. I was always in the classroom and always, doing my nerd stuff. And he'd say, when are you going to go deer hunting? So finally one year I did. And your listeners will get a kick out of this. The very first time I ever went deer hunting, ever, the first time I ever pulled the trigger on a gun to shoot a deer, I didn't know I didn't know. The first time I ever shot, I shot an 11-point buck, and all I had was my wife's Prius. So we had to put that deer in the back of a Prius. And you want to talk about a confused high school kid at the processor 4 hours away when I said, hey, I got a deer out back, and he came around and goes, where's the truck? And I was like, nah, it's in the Prius. And so that was my introduction. And then as I've worked in mental health, I've come to believe a couple of things. We don't get outside enough, and getting outside is important. There's a communal aspect. So it's given me, as an adult, it's very hard to make friends as an adult. So when you find common things, like common interests. So I've got a group of guys I have lunch with. We have text threads. We make fun of each other. We talk to each other. We hunt together. That's been an important aspect of it. And then I really think we have a significant disconnection from where our food comes from, our grains and our vegetables and our fruits and our meats. I think we just are a generation removed from that. And so we just think it shows up at the grocery store. And I think there's a disconnect that makes us unhealthy, physically, but way more than that, emotionally and mentally. And so it's been important for me to stay grounded, that when my family eats, an animal gave its life for my family. And it's important for me to teach that to my son. It's important for me to get my blood on my hands and be a part of that. And it makes me appreciate it that much more, and on and on and on and on. So it went from a thing to do with my father-in-law to now it's a thing that is just an important, integral part of me and my family's life.
How do you find the time to, stay up to speed on your practice, especially with the bow?
I think you have to, number one, you don't do anything unless you do it intentionally, right? And so I think it's making time for the practice. And what I try to do is double and triple and quadruple dip whenever possible. So I know the science behind the importance of getting sunlight in your eyes, either early in the morning, especially early in the morning, and in the evening time. So that's an important thing that I think all people need to do all the time. The second thing is it's important to be outside when it's too hot, when it's too cold, to have different temperature stuff. And so the third thing is, man, I find especially bow shooting to be incredibly meditative. It is, if it's something you go through a process, you go through it over and over, and the tiniest little like movement here or wrist twitch here. And so after a hard day of sitting with hurting people, going outside, taking my shoes off, getting my feet in the grass, and just spending 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then now that my son, he's 14, now that he's shooting a bow, now you add in the time I get with him and also the added trash talking that we do to each other. So it's just added a whole thing, but I'm getting 4 or 5 things done at one time. And I think that's the only way in our modern crazy world we have that we can get stuff done like that.
I wanted to ask you about passing that down to your son and to your kids, or to the next generation, and what that means to you. For me personally, John, just thinking here this past weekend, even though here in the Midwest we've got a bunch of snow and temperatures ranging between 0 and 10 degrees, I took my 4-year-old son outside. I have my grandpa's old recurve that was willed down to me, and this past Christmas, my son got a little youth longbow. So we were just out for a couple hours, shooting targets, and you wouldn't believe the smile on his face. It was a highlight of my parenthood so far. So, what's that mean to you, getting those experiences with your kids?
Well, it's all of it, right? So it is, like I said, I started off telling you why I'm into outdoor stuff, because my dad took me with him when he was a kid. Everything about my dad trying to catch some snakes and make some extra money would have been better if he did not have a 4-year-old dragging through the woods with him, right? But he chose to have less success and go much slower and have me tagging along. And he sparked a lifelong passion, right? And now we know all the research about going out into nature, going out into the woods, going for walks with trees and stuff like that. So inadvertently, he set me on a path that when I get stressed, I find peace going for a hike or going out in nature, right? So I know that I need to pass that down to my son, and I'm always looking for things we can do where we can connect, right? And I think we have largely outsourced that to the NFL and Major League Baseball. I love sports. I watched a playoff game last night, but I think instead of playing sports, we now pay other grown men millions and millions of dollars to play them for us. And instead of playing catch with our son, we pay for other people to play catch with each other, and we'll just watch it together. And I think our kids, my daughter too, like they want to participate in some of this stuff, right? And all of this stuff. And so this is a good way to do it. And then I really believe in teaching at a young age. I think it's an Emerson quote, ruffled. It's a famous writer, and off the top of my head, I just lost it. But I remember that the quote rang true in my soul. I pity the grown man who never had the opportunity to fire a weapon at a young age, so that he could feel in his bones the extent of a man's rage. And I think that with we have had an increasing disassociation of life, of reality, and entertainment. And so you've got kids now that have never been in the room with a bow and arrow, or have never been in the room with a dead animal, yet eat burgers all the time and watch tons and tons of John Wick. And so when you are with a kid, when you're with a young child and you're with them, and it's obviously it's a safe environment. I'm obnoxious about safety. That first time a kid feels a gun, their hands literally come off, like they understand, because it's in their nervous system. That is a dangerous, frightening, awful thing. It is not a sexy tool like you see on a Hollywood movie, right? And so, or in some first person shooter video game. So you've got kids who have seen thousands and thousands of deaths, but they've never been in the room with it. And so my son and I, like every time we shoot a deer, we have a prayer ritual we go through where we thank that animal for giving its life so that our family could eat. And I want my daughter to feel the gravity of every meal we have is because a farmer went out there and sweat really hard to pull vegetables out of the ground so that we could eat, right? Or every time we eat a burger, an animal is not alive anymore, or a chicken or venison, right? And so I want them to have the appreciation. I don't want them to go through life thinking things just happen, because that's how cultures fall over on themselves. And so it's everything from laughter to trash talking to having a good time to competition to the bigger, what I would call more spiritual and existential things like, hey, this is actually life and death. And you have to carry it with that sort of gravitas. And how dare a hunter go out into the woods that hasn't been practicing? Right. That's a way to dishonor a living creature, right? If you're going to go out there and take life, know what you're doing and be able to do it well and compassionately and quickly and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's all of that all wrapped up into one.
Wow. Yeah. So when you look at these one-on-one experiences and being connected with your children, do you get those types of questions when you're out in your events that you're with folks, or do you write about this in any of your books, like Building a Non-Anxious Life, as far as like making sure you're getting that bonding connection time with your children through avenues, could be like the outdoors?
Yeah, I know that hunting is its own subculture, and um, I know that it often is hard unless you've been there, unless you've experienced it, unless you've sat down and really thought about it and written about it and read about it. It can sound like grotesque. It can sound kind of out there. It can sound right. And when people post their pictures of their old bloodied up animals and stuff like that. So I get that there can be I want to keep this at arm's length. I don't like it. It's gross, whatever. And so I get that. So I try to be sensitive about that, or less sensitive. I try to be respectful. Right. And also, I'm not gonna, I think I've written about in Own Your Past, Change Your Future. I wrote about how we have separated ourselves. We've outsourced death. We've outsourced death to funeral homes. We used to have a room in our house called the parlor, where our relatives would stay for 2 or 3 or 4 days, where visitors would come see them. We don't have that anymore. We outsource that to somebody who works in the quote unquote funeral arts, right? And I think we rob our bodies of a natural grieving process. And same with our food. I think we rob our bodies of a cycle that happens biochemically every time we go through the process. And so all that to say is, yeah, I write about it, but I try to be respectful of people who don't understand hunting, never even considered it. I get the fact that seeing a young boy with his dad and a gun and a dead animal, that can make for a strange photo if you're trying to, if you're not in that world. I get that totally. So I don't post any of the animals I shoot. I don't post any of that kind of stuff on social media, just out of respect for people. But with social media, like, this is my life. And I spend a lot of the fall in a tree, right? I spend a lot of the fall laying down in the woods, whispering to my son, trying not to laugh. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I try to walk that line, but just be respectful of everybody.
Not to put you on the spot, but what would you say is one of your favorite hunting memories? For me, John, I think back to one of the first times as a kid that I went turkey hunting. My grandpa took me, and we were on this big ridge in a wooded timber on some private that we had permission on. We didn't see any turkeys that entire morning. It was so cold. It was frosty. And I remember I was shaking the whole time. And about mid-morning, about 10 o'clock or so, this group of white-tailed does came by, probably 9 or 10, right down the trail, right to us, and got within about 5 yards. And I had never been that close to deer before. And I remember just shaking like a leaf, almost scared because they were getting really close to us. And I think he could sense that I was uncomfortable. And in that moment, I'll never forget, he just made like a meowing noise at him like a cat, like trying to make me laugh and kind of ease the tension a little bit, and of course they looked around, snorted and blew at us and took off. But it's a kind of a strange story, but it's just for me,
No,
I'll never forget it. It was the coolest thing. He just knew I was uncomfortable and wanted to kind of ease the tension and made a cat meowing noise at him to get me to
Yeah, I think every hunter eventually has what I would call that magic moment. My son had it for the first time this year. He's old enough now that we can kind of loop around. He doesn't have to be right by my side, and he was hidden in some grass, and he had an encounter from about 7 yards away. And to hear him retell it, it was a spiritual thing, like to be that close to an animal that doesn't know you're there. And he chose not to harvest that animal. He just wanted to be with it. And he said it was a changing, he left and he said, I'm going to be a bow hunter now, Dad. But it was because it was like, it felt right. So that was a cool story. I think, I mean, I've got so many great hunting stories. Most of them are with friends and that are filled with laughter or kind of sketchy situations that kind of like probably wasn't the safest thing. But probably one of the favorites off the top of my head was this year. I mean, this is like maybe 4 weeks ago. I was on my belly crawling. There was a whole herd of axis deer in Texas walking across the road, and there just happened to be a stupid little hump in the road to where I couldn't make a safe shot. And so I'm trying to crawl on my belly, and my son and the guy who was spotting was up on a mountain, and I crawled within 75 yards, and I was about to turn this quarter, and I heard the shot go off, and I just got a text from my son, and it just said, "Gotcha." And so my son took the animal that I was going to get, and that ended up being a hilarious, like we were laughing about it. And he's like, I mean, at some point, Dad, I was going to be better than you. So it made for a funny story, but I just love those. My buddy was with us. His son was with us. They were laughing. We were all carrying on. So I love that part, man. And I also love this. I love having a 14-year-old. Him and his buddy were there. And I said, all right, well, y'all have to load up that deer and y'all have to take it back to camp and you got to process it. And they did. It was amazing. And so that was a part that, as just a dad, I thought, all right, if I die tomorrow and the world implodes, my son knows how to feed him and my wife, right? Which sounds cheesy. My wife's a way better shot than all of us, but and she absolutely does not hunt, but she's pretty amazing with the shotgun. But it's just one of those things that, I don't know, just feels good to know that you're passing it along.
Does anybody else on the Ramsey team hunt? Do you get to talk about it with anybody, or are you kind of the only one?
No, I'm the only one. I don't know. I think George only eats dinosaur shaped chicken nuggets that are gluten free or something. So I don't know, but no, I'm the only that guy. Yeah. So yeah, I'm the only hunter, I think. Dave is a avid marksman, but he shoots like more competition target stuff. And so, no, I'm a hunter.
Very good. Well, before you go, John, do you mind telling the listeners about your new book that's out, Building a Non-Anxious Life? I'm partway through it currently, and it's been fantastic up to this point. Didn't know if you could just take a few minutes and talk to the listeners about your recent book.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Building a Non-Anxious Life is ultimately about this idea that I think most of the time when we're anxious, it doesn't mean our bodies are broken. It doesn't mean we're malfunctioning somehow. It usually means that our bodies are pretty smart and it has detected things in our environment that aren't safe. And it might be that we think we got a great new deal on this real fancy house. We got a great new deal on this new fancy truck. But our body knows, hey, if we get laid off, they can come take our car and they can take our home and we're going to be out on the street. And so our body would be failing us if it let us sleep. Right. Or we've created the loneliest generation in human history, or we are just an angry, raged out, scrolling all the time society. And so I think when we're anxious in our modern world, not all the time, but often our bodies are right. And so instead of trying to silence the anxiety alarms, the analogy I use in the book is anxiety is just a smoke detector in your kitchen, man. The detector going off is not the problem. It's the fire, right? It's the smoke. So let's put the fires out and the alarms will quit ringing all the time. And so I want people to begin to look at their lives when they're feeling anxious, when they're feeling stressed out, when they're feeling frustrated. Head towards that stress, head towards that frustration, and try to figure out what's actually on fire in my life. It might be financial, it might be relationship, it might be my job's about to go away, it might be any number of things. But let's head towards those challenges instead of away from them.
Dr. John Delony with us here on the Outdoor Adventures podcast. John, thank you so much for taking some time to join us here in your busy schedule, and wishing you the best, you and the team at Ramsey and your family in 2025 and beyond, sir. Thank you.
Well, I'm really grateful for you, brother, and thanks for putting positive things out in the world, man, and inspiring another generation of ag folks and another generation of hunters, man. That's pretty cool.
Dr. John Delony, best-selling author and host of the Dr. John Delony Show on the Ramsey Network. You can catch this episode on our Brownfield Ag News YouTube channel or wherever you get your audio podcasts. It'll be there as well. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield Ag News. Thanks for watching us here on Outdoor Adventures this week.